My name is Ren Calloway, and I'm 29 years old. 11 years ago, 3 days before my 18th birthday, my parents canceled my party because my older sister cried that it made her feel invisible. I moved out that same night with 2 duffel bags, a coffee can with $980 in it, and 1 phone call to the only adult who had ever paid me on time. What happened exactly 1 year later at my grandmother's 80th birthday party, in the middle of a flower field I'd planted with my own 2 hands, is the part of the story my family still refuses to say out loud. My sister stood in that field, looked at everything I'd built, and came apart in front of 31 relatives. The fallout split our family straight down the middle, and it has never been repaired. But here's what none of them ever understood. I wasn't the one who broke us. I just stopped holding the pieces together. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where women who were told to shrink finally tell the whole truth, calmly, all the way to the end. If you've ever been the one who was just fine on her own, this one's for you. Drop a comment and subscribe, because you'll want to be here when we get to that field. To explain the birthday, I have to explain the house. Our family ran like an emergency room. Whoever was bleeding loudest got everything the money, the attention, both parents at once. And my sister, Marisa, was always bleeding the loudest. I figured out the math when I was 7 years old. My 2nd grade recital fell on the same night, Marisa. Then 10. Developed a stomachache that vanished by 9 o'clock. Nobody came to hear me sing. My mother explained it in the car, patient as a bank teller counting bills. Your sister needed us. I'm sure you did. Wonderful. When I was 12, I saved for a pair of white sneakers with my own birthday money. They became family shoes the week Marissa decided hers pinched. When teachers praised me, my mother repackaged the compliment before it ever reached the dinner table quieter. Smaller, something we didn't dwell on. Dwelling was reserved for one person in that house, and it wasn't me. I want to be fair, because fairness is the whole point of this story. My parents never raised a hand to me. I was fed, clothed, driven to school. But in the Calloway house, fine wasn't a feeling, it was a job assignment. I was hired at 7, and I never once got a day off. The one person who saw the arithmetic clearly was my father. He'd catch my eye across the wreckage of another ruined evening and look at me like a man watching weather he had no plans to come in from. The summer I turned 15, he found me weeding my grandmother's flower beds and said, out of nowhere, 18 is yours. Kiddo, whatever you want. I promise you that. I planted that promise deeper than anything I ever put in the ground. That was my mistake. It took 3 years to grow into the worst night of my life. You should understand my sister too, because this story isn't fair to her either, just in a different way. Marissa was 21 that fall, 3 years older than me, and she had already enrolled in and abandoned 2 different colleges. Each exit arrived the same way: a midnight phone call, a manufactured crisis. My mother mobilizing like the National Guard. Nobody in our house ever used the word failed. Marissa wasn't supported enough. Marissa was more sensitive than other people. Every collapse got renamed until it sounded like a diagnosis. And every diagnosis came with a bill my parents were honored to pay. Here's the thing I only understood years later: they built her that way. From the crib. Marissa was told she was fragile. So fragile is what she became. Needing things was her entire identity. The same way not needing things was mine. We were both cast in our roles before we could talk. The clearest picture I can give you is the night of my county fair banquet. The spring I turned 16. I'd won a blue ribbon for a raised bed irrigation system. I designed myself the first thing I was ever publicly good at. My parents actually came, which shocked me. Then Marissa called from a parking lot, crying about a boyfriend, and dinner ended before the awards did. I rode home with my ribbon in my lap, in the kitchen, Marissa saw it and her face crumpled like I'd slapped her. Tonight was awful. She said, and you're standing there with a prize. It's supposed to be about me right now. She said it the way you'd cite a rule, because in our house, it was one. My mother made her tea. Nobody has to see the ribbon. I pinned it inside my closet door, where things that were mine had to live in secret. What saved me was dirt. At 14, I started weekends at Sorensen's greenhouse on the edge of town, hauling flats and washing pots for Peg Sorensen, 63 years old. Built like a fence post, constitutionally incapable of flattery. Peg paid me in wages, eye rolls, and free advice, which is to say, she paid me more than anyone else in my life ever had. By 17, I could run her seed room alone. Every paycheck went into a savings account at Millhaven Trust Bank, $11. 240 by that September. 3 years of Saturdays. One detail matters here. I opened that account at 14, and the bank required an adult cosigner. So it became a joint account with my mother's name on it at 17. I asked to open my own. The teller said I'd need a parent to sign off until I turned 18. My mother smiled and said, after your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time. Then she said it again in June. And again in August, I noticed, I want that on the record, I noticed. So I started skimming my own harvest, cashing small amounts, 20 here, 40 there, folding the bills into an empty coffee can I kept behind my winter boots. By September, the can held $980. I told myself I was being paranoid, that mothers don't need to be watched like weather. Looking back, I wasn't being paranoid. I was being slow. The party I'd planned wasn't much by most standards. Dinner in my grandmother's backyard. String lights in the oak tree. A sheet cake from Millhaven Bakery, yellow cake. Buttercream. My name piped across the top in blue icing. 15 folding chairs. Peg invited. And threatening to actually show up. That was a whole dream one evening. One table. Everybody's eyes pointed the same direction for once. And the direction was me. My father had promised. For 3 years, I'd carried that promise around like a seed packet. Checking the date, 18 was also a doorway. I'd been accepted into the State Agricultural College for the spring semester. And past that, blurry but real, was the only future I ever actually wanted a cut flower farm with my own name on the sign. My grandmother, Opal, was the one who put that shape in my head. She grew heirloom peonies behind her house on Larkspur Street, a deep garnet variety her family had kept alive since the year my father was born, petals so dark they looked like they were drinking the light instead of reflecting it. That August, she'd walk me down her row, tapped a bloom, and said, flowers don't apologize for taking up space in the bed. Vren. Notice that I did notice. I noticed it the way you notice a door standing open. Then, 3 weeks before my birthday, Marissa announced her third program, a wellness and design semester in Columbus. Very exclusive, very urgent. It needed a deposit right away. She said, or her spot would go to someone whose family actually believed in them. I remember exactly where I was standing when she said that, because the kitchen went quiet in a way I'd been trained since childhood to read. Quiet in our house was the sound of money changing direction. Marissa lasted 11 days in Columbus. 4 days before my birthday, a Friday, she came home at 1 a.m. I heard the front door, then the particular register of her crying, the kind that meant furniture was about to be rearranged around it. By breakfast, the house had a new gravity. My mother moved through the kitchen like a triage nurse, murmuring into her phone. My father sat with his coffee and studied the table. Marissa held the middle of the couch wrapped in the good quilt, narrating the unfairness of Columbus to anyone who passed by. I made toast and said nothing. That was my job. That evening, I heard my mother in the hallway on the phone with my Aunt Denise. Her voice in its planning register low, smooth, the tone she used when a story was being fitted for public wear. I caught the phrase, "What's best for the family right now?" And then the smaller phrase after it, aimed at me without my name attached. Well, she's got her whole life for parties. I stood in my room with a stack of hand-lettered invitations I'd never gotten around to mailing, because something in me had already known better than to make it official. 15 envelopes, each with a little peony drawn in the corner. I put them face down in my desk drawer and told myself the math could still work, that even in our emergency room, a girl only turns 18 once. And surely that outranked homesickness. The next morning, my mother knocked on my door with 2 mugs of cocoa. She had her gift wrapping voice on, and I knew before she said a word exactly which gift was about to be taken back. "Sweetheart," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed, "about Tuesday. Your dad and I have been talking. With everything your sister's going through, a party right now would just rub salt in it. She sees you celebrating with her whole life upside down. Honey, it would break her." I asked what exactly they wanted to do. "Postpone." She said, "Bright as a coupon, just until Marissa's stronger. We'll do something small later. Family only." Latter, in the Calloway house, later was where my things went to die. I looked at her and did something I had never done at that kitchen table in my entire life. I asked the real question. "When is my turn scheduled?" "Mom, I'd like to see the calendar." Her face flickered, then settled. And she said, the sentence that has followed me for 11 years, "Oh, Vren, don't be dramatic. You've always been fine on your own." There it was. The family constitution read aloud at last. Being fine was my contribution, the tax I paid so the household could balance. Behind her, my father appeared in the doorway. This is the part that stayed sharp longer than any of it. He looked at me, and he knew, 18 is yours. Kiddo, I promise. He put one hand on the door frame, opened his mouth, and then Marissa called from downstairs, wet and urgent. And the doorway was empty. 30 seconds, maybe less. That's how long a 3-year promise takes to fold. My mother squeezed my knee on her way out. "You'll understand when you have a sensitive child." She said, I sat very still after they left, listening to the house rearrange itself around my sister 1 floor down. I didn't rage, and I didn't beg. If you've ever been the strong one, why practice? What I did was open my laptop and check the balance on that savings account. Then, that evening, the bakery called not to cancel, but to confirm the changes to Order 41. I said I hadn't made any changes. The girl on the phone read them to me anyway. Cheerful, oblivious, each word landing like gravel. Same cake. New pickup day Saturday, new inscription. They'd kept my yellow cake with the buttercream and scraped my name off the ticket. It now read, "Welcome home, Marissa." There was going to be an encouragement dinner the following Saturday. 4 days after my birthday would have passed, uncelebrated. And the guest list overlapped mine almost exactly. Same aunts, same cousins, same folding chairs. My party hadn't been postponed. It had been harvested for parts. I thanked the bakery girl, because none of it was her fault, and hung up. Something in my chest went very quiet and very level. Like a field after the combine passes, People think decisions like mine get made in flames. Mine wasn't. It was made the way frost comes clear sky. No wind. Everything simply done growing. I took my 2 duffel bags down from the closet shelf. I packed work clothes, boots, the ribbon off the closet door, the 15 envelopes I never sent. I dug the coffee can out from behind my winter boots and counted it by touch. Then I sat on my bed and made one phone call to the only adult who had ever paid me on time and on purpose. Peg Sorensen listened for about 10 seconds. The loft over the seed room has a bed in it. She said, "It's drafty. Rent's $40 a month, and you'll earn it before sunrise. Come or don't." My birthday was still 3 days away. I didn't wait for it. I moved out that same night. Leaving a house you grew up in takes about 4 minutes. If you've been packing your whole life without knowing it. I came down the stairs with a duffel on each shoulder. My mother was at the kitchen island with her tea. She looked at the bags, then at me, and chose irritation over alarm. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Vrin? Don't be theatrical. Where exactly do you think you're going?" I said I had work in the morning, which was true, and left the rest. Marissa watched from the couch with the quilt pulled to her chin, and for half a second, something crossed her face that looked almost like envy of the bags, of the door, of a person who got to be the one leaving. My father followed me onto the porch. He pressed a folded envelope into my hand. $60 in fives and tens, the cash of a man who'd been quietly emptying his pockets into a drawer for a while. "Call your grandmother on Sundays." He said, "She'll worry." He didn't say, "Don't go." We both heard him not say it. I walked the 2 miles to Sorensen's greenhouse under a sky the color of a bruised plum. When I let myself into the seed room, the warm smell of soil met me like somebody glad I'd come. 3 days later, I turned 18 over a gas station cupcake with 1 candle peg stuck in it, embarrassed by her own gesture. Then, Wednesday morning, I went to the bank to collect 3 years of Saturdays. Finally, no cosigner needed, and that's when the teller's face changed. I'd come in to open my own account and slide my savings across the desk into it. The teller pulled up the joint account, and her smile did that thing bank smiles do when the screen disagrees with the customer. The balance was $1. Sibling Sisher, nearly $9. $800 had been withdrawn 3 weeks earlier, right around the time Marissa's very exclusive Columbus program needed its deposit right away. Every stall made sense at once. "After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time." My mother hadn't been forgetting to co-sign my paperwork. She'd been keeping the gate open until she was done using the field. And here's the part I want every one of you to sit with. It was completely legal. A joint account belongs to both names on it. She didn't steal a dime, as far as the law was concerned. She just spent 3 years of my Saturdays on a program my sister quit in 11 days. I called her from the parking lot. She didn't even pause. Family money goes where the family needs it. Vren, your sister's future was on the line. You're young. You're healthy. You'll earn it back in no time. Then, gentler, like a tip left for a waitress. This is what families do. I went back inside, withdrew the $1, Sibling Sisher, and closed the account with both hands steady. I waited until I was in Peg's borrowed truck before I let them shake. By Sunday, my mother had already told the family her version of everything: the party, the bags, the bank. I found out from a voicemail. It seemed I was now the villain of a story I hadn't even been allowed to read. The official Calloway family version went like this: Wren threw a tantrum over a birthday party, abandoned her sister during a mental health crisis, and stormed out to punish everyone. It played at church. It played at the salon. It played especially well with my Aunt Denise, who left me a voicemail saying, "I'm just disappointed. Honey, Your mother is heartbroken. A party. Ren really... I didn't call back and argue, and I want to explain why. Because it wasn't weakness. My mother had been rehearsing the family narrator role for over 50 years. Arguing with her in front of her audience was playing an away game against a Hall of Famer. I decided my side of the story would have to grow up out of the ground, where nobody could talk over it. The first Sunday of October, an old sedan crunched into the greenhouse lot, and my grandmother Opal climbed out of it, 79 years old, cane in one hand, a shoebox under her arm. She looked around the seed room like a woman inspecting a fence line, then set the box on the potting bench. Inside, packed in wood shavings, were peony roots, knobby and ugly and miraculous, dug from the garnet row behind her house. You know what these are, she said. It wasn't a question. Plant them somewhere, they'll get looked at. Then she patted my cheek with a hand like paper and said she was missing her program. I made it all the way to her taillights before I finally came apart. Being robbed hadn't managed that. Being handed something did. That fall and winter, my life shrank to a rhythm. You could set a watch by greenhouse from 5:30 to 2, hauling, watering, learning Peg's seed room like scripture. Then the dinner shift at a diner downtown until 10. Carrying meatloaf specials to men who tipped in quarters and advice. Back in the loft, I read Peg's beat-up growing manuals until the words swam succession planting. Cold hardiness. Stems per row foot. I filled a spiral notebook with plans and crossed most of them out, which Peg assured me was the whole job. I also wrote to the agricultural college and deferred my spot 1 year. I told them it was financial. But it was also this somewhere between the bank and the shoebox. My plan had changed shape. Meanwhile, across town, 800 had bought my sister a semester she never finished and a bedroom she never left. My grandmother reported in every Sunday, dry as toast. Your sister's resting. Your father's mowing a lawn that stopped growing in October. Let me pause here, because I know some of you are living this exact winter right now. If you've ever worked a double shift while the person who took from you slept in your old bedroom, tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this story is starting to feel like yours, subscribe now, because the next part is where the ground starts to turn. Thanksgiving was coming, and my mother has never in her life let a holiday go unused. She called the Monday before, her voice warm as a casserole. We want you at the table. Sweetheart, this silliness has gone on long enough. We're prepared to put the whole outburst behind us. I asked what putting it behind us involved, because with my mother, forgiveness always came with paperwork. She laid out the terms like a recipe. I would apologize to Marissa in front of the family for making her setback about me. I would move back into my old room where they could keep an eye on me. I would contribute to the household now that I was so keen on working. And I would let go of this little gardening phase before I embarrassed myself further. And if I say no, I asked. Her voice cooled a single degree. We worry about your sister. Vren, she's delicate. You've always been fine. Honestly, it's the one thing we never had to think about. There it was again. Article 1 of the family constitution. I thanked her for the invitation and told her I had to work Thanksgiving morning. The silence on the line had a shape to it. Then don't bother coming at Christmas either. She said, and hung up first. She always hung up first. Here's what I didn't know that night. It would be almost 10 months before I heard my mother's voice again. And by then, everything about the ground between us would have changed. Christmas Eve, the greenhouse was closed and the loft was so quiet I could hear the propane heater think about quitting. I wrote my mother a card. It took me an hour. 4 drafts. the last one down to almost nothing. Merry Christmas. Mom, I'm safe. I'm working. I sat with a stamp on my tongue and understood, with a clarity that tasted like glue, that I wasn't writing to my mother. I was writing to a mother I had invented, one who would read it at the sink and soften and drive over with cocoa. That woman didn't live at my parents' address. I put the card in the drawer with my 15 unsent invitations. The collection was growing. Around 8 headlights swept the lot, and my grandmother let herself into the seed room with a tin of molasses cookies and zero explanation of what she'd told my parents about where she was going. Peg stopped by near 9 with something wrapped in brown paper, a spool of heavy Grosgrain ribbon, the good kind. For your first market table, she said, daring me to make it emotional. I didn't dare. But when they'd gone, I stood the spool on the windowsill, and it looked exactly like what it was, a bet. 2 women had just wagered on a girl with $1, $400 in a shoebox. In January, Peg raised the stakes herself. She walked me out to the backfield in boots and a dead man's barn coat and made me an offer that split my life into before and after. 2 acres of ground behind the greenhouses, south-facing, waterline already run to the old trough. I don't do charity. She said before I could say anything. 3 seasons. $900 a season. First season up front. You supply your own sweat, your own seed, your own mistakes. Written down proper, both signatures, so neither of us get sentimental about it. $900 was nearly everything left. I stood on the frozen ground, did the math 3 times, and the math said no. And something underneath the math said now. I signed at her kitchen table that Friday. 2 acres, $900, and a shoebox. That was my entire inheritance. And it turned out to be enough. That February, when the ground gave, I buried my grandmother's garnet roots in trays of damp shavings to wake them. And the first green shoots broke through on the exact morning the county paper would have called foolish. Spring made me pay for my confidence almost immediately. A late frost slid down out of Canada on a clear, windless night and took $400 of seedlings I'd planted too early, gambling against the forecast because hope is a beautiful liar. I gave myself 1 hour to feel sick about it, sitting on an overturned bucket at the end of the dead row. Then I got the notebook and wrote down the date, the low temperature, and the lesson, because self-pity doesn't compost into anything, but records do. Peg came out around 7, surveyed the damage, and delivered the eulogy. Frost isn't a verdict. Girl, it's tuition. We replanted. By the last week of May, the field had gone from graph paper to green rows straight enough that Peg grunted at them, which, from Peg, was a parade. And by the first Saturday of June, I had a problem I'd never planned for buckets and buckets of flowers. Cut, conditioned, gorgeous, and not one single place to sell them. The Millhaven Farmers Market rents you 8 feet of Saturday for $15. I took the space between a honey vendor and a woman who sold goat milk soap, set up a borrowed card table, and dressed it with Peg's ribbon and a chalkboard I'd lettered at midnight. Mixed bouquets, $12. Zinnias like carnival glass, cosmos, snapdragons, bachelor's buttons. I'd wrapped 30 bouquets in craft paper and was quietly terrified of coming home with 29. The first customer was a retired school teacher who bought 2 and told me nobody had sold real flowers at that market in years. By noon, I'd sold clean out $340 in a cigar box. Most of it in 5s, my cheeks aching from a shape they weren't used to holding. Word moves the way word moves in a town like Millhaven. 2 women from my mother's own church stopped by, recognized me, and got very busy smelling the sweet peas. Before the market even closed, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen since Thanksgiving. 1 line times, a market stall. Congratulations. I read it twice. Put the phone in the cash box with the 5s. And sold the last 3 bouquets. I never did answer. The field answered for me all summer long. In July, a bride named Hannah stopped at my stall, teared up over the snapdragons, and asked if I did weddings. I said yes, with the confidence of someone who had never done a wedding. $850 for late August bridal bouquet. 5 jars per table. Arch flowers. I read for 2 weeks and didn't sleep the night before. Floating stems in every vessel Peg owned. And late August is when the peonies came in, my grandmother's garnet blooms breaking open the size of saucers. That impossible dark red. I built Hannah's bouquet around 9 of them. At the reception, 3 separate women asked the caterer who'd done the flowers. She pointed across the room at me. The peony girl. She said, and it stuck the way accidental names stick. By September, the operation looked like an actual business if you squinted with kindness. 25 subscription customers took a wrapped bouquet every Friday. My best friend, Josie Reyes, had been showing up on Saturdays since June 1st for gossip, then for pay. She's the one who sanded an old fence board, painted Callaway blooms on it in buttermilk white, and screwed it to the market stall before I could vote on it. My name in paint, in public. I stood there feeling naked about it, which tells you everything about how I was raised. Meanwhile, my grandmother's Sunday reports kept coming. Marissa had quit an online course in June and gone quiet. My mother had stopped mentioning me at church, which Opal said was its own kind of mention. The whole town was doing arithmetic. My mother couldn't stop. A girl who supposedly stormed off over a birthday party doesn't usually surface a year later with a field, a sign, and a waiting list. Then, the Tuesday after Labor Day, a number I didn't recognize lit up my phone. The county paper, and the first thing I told that reporter was no. Her name was Dana Reyes, no relation to Josie, and she wrote the paper's farm and table column. Somebody at the market had tipped her off. My mouth said, oh, no, thank you, before my brain even sat up the reflex of a girl trained from birth to hand the microphone down the table. I told Peg about it that evening, expecting agreement. Instead, she set her coffee down with a click. Girl, for a year, other people have been telling your story at every supper table in this county. And you handed them the pen because keeping your head down felt like good manners. She pushed the mug away. That reporter's offering you the pen back. Take it. I called Dana the next morning. She came Thursday with a photographer, walked my rows for 2 hours, and asked questions nobody in my family had ever asked me. Why peonies? Why flowers at all? What the frost had taught me. When the photographer looked for a backdrop, I did the bravest thing I'd done since a September night with 2 duffel bags. I stood alone, dead center in the garnet row, dirt on my knuckles, and looked straight into the lens. The story ran the following Thursday, front of the features section. The 19-year-old behind Callaway blooms. By that Thursday noon, my mother had read it. By that Thursday night, so had every person she'd ever handed her version to. The town did the math in one sitting. Women I'd never met joined the subscription list with notes like, so proud of you, honey, and my mother's telling of things tantrum. Abandonment folded quietly. The way a lie folds when a photograph walks into the room. She called Friday morning. No, hello. You put our family's business in the newspaper. When? I pointed out that the article never mentioned the family at all. Exactly. She said, her voice shaking in a way I'd never heard. Everyone's asking your sister what she's doing now, at the pharmacy, at church. Do you understand what that does to her? Of course you don't. You've always been fine. You have no idea what it's like for her. I looked out at 2 acres of proof and said, gently, you're right, Mom. I don't. And then, for the first time in my entire life, I hung up first. Marissa said nothing at all. No text. No message through my grandmother. From a house where feelings were broadcast at full volume, silence was a new instrument. I should have wondered harder what it was tuning up for. Because the next call came from my grandmother with a demand. Opal turned 80 at the end of September, and she called me herself, which she did roughly never phones being, in her view, a fad. They're planning my birthday. She said, Denise wants the church hall. Your mother wants the house, where she can manage things. A pause. And I could hear her smiling around her own idea. I told them I've sat in both those rooms for 80 years. I want my party in your field, in the middle of something honest. I already told the whole family. I announced it so nobody could wiggle out. I sat down on a bucket, my field, 31 Callaways and Callaway adjacent relatives, including 2 parents and 1 sister I hadn't laid eyes on in a year. Standing in the middle of everything I'd built out of the wreckage they'd handed me. Grandma, I said, Mom will never come. She'll come, Opal said, flat as a griddle. Skipping my 80th after the year we've had in front of everyone. Your mother would rather chew glass. That's exactly why I did it. Sweet pea. It's my birthday. I'm allowed 1 present. I picked myself. She wanted the truth in the room. This woman wanted it planted where nobody could talk over it. 1 week out, my mother called with a small favor. She opened with logistics. As if nothing had happened, how many chairs? Should Denise bring her lemon bars? Then, casually, the way you'd slip a knife into a picnic basket, 1 small thing. Sweetheart, someday, when people ask about the farm, and they will, it would mean the world if you'd present it as a family project. Because honestly, that's what it is. If you think about it, you learned your work ethic somewhere. She pressed on, and we think it would be healing. Dr. Feldman thinks it would be healing for Marissa to have a role there. Events, party, that sort of thing. She has such an eye. It doesn't need to be formal. Just if it comes up, you could mention Marissa handles events for Callaway Blooms. She needs a win. Vrin, you have so many now. There it was. The emergency room billing department, open for business, my party, my savings. And now the ask had simply scaled up with the harvest. No, Mom, I said calm as I could make it, which by then was very calm. The farm isn't an apology and it isn't a prop, but you're both welcome Sunday. As guests, I'd genuinely like you to come. The silence went on 1 beat too long. Fine, she said lightly. I thought I'd close the door on the ambush. I had only closed the front one. The party fell on the last Sunday of September 1 year, almost to the week, since I'd carried 2 duffel bags down my parents' stairs. Saturday, we set up. Josie and Peg hauled long tables into the center aisle between the peony rows, and I strung lights through the fence posts and the young maple by the gate, the exact kind of lights I'd once planned for a backyard on Larkspur Street. Yes, I noticed, and yes, I hung them anyway. We cut 200 stems of my grandmother's garnet peonies and stood them in zinc buckets down the tables. The field was at its absolute peak. Mid-afternoon, a familiar truck eased up the lane. My father alone, with 40 folding chairs from the church hall. We hadn't stood face to face in a year. He got out, looked down the rows for a long moment, and said, "Ground drain's good here." That's a love letter. In my father's dialect, we set up chairs together for an hour, mostly quiet. Twice he stopped, half turned to me with his mouth already open, and both times folded whatever it was back up and put it away. Like the $60 in fives. At the gate, leaving, he tried again and got as far as, "Your grandmother's real proud." Then he drove off toward the house where my mother was. No doubt. Ironing the outfits and the story both. The next afternoon, 31 members of my family walked into my field. Every single one of them came, even her. Especially her. Late September had dressed the place better than I ever could. 200 garnet peonies down the long tables. The light going gold. The rose burning dark red out to the fence line. My grandmother arrived like a head of state, took one slow lap of the center aisle on Denise's arm, and installed herself at the head table, where she could supervise both the cake and the truth. My mother stepped out of the car in her navy church dress. And I'll give her this, she never once looked surprised. She toured the tables like a hostess, straightening a jar here, angling a bucket there, telling my aunt, "Oh, we always knew Ren had the gift. She gets it from my side. I grew things before the girls came along. Smooth as fondant. A year of tantrum and abandonment. Repaved in one afternoon into times we always knew. I let it go by. The field didn't need me to argue for it. Marissa came last. 40 minutes late. In a dress too formal for folding chairs. She hugged our grandmother for the photo, took a glass of lemonade she didn't drink, and drifted the perimeter alone, reading my life like an audit. I watched her stop at the gate where Josie's fence board sign hung Times, Callaway Bloom's Times, and stand in front of it. Very still, for longer than anyone stands in front of a sign. Just before the toasts, I went to cut a few last stems for the cake table and found my mother standing alone at the far end of the garnet row, where the party noise thinned out to bees. She didn't hear me coming. She was touching one of the big blooms with 2 fingers. Barely the way you'd touch a sleeping baby, or a stove you suspect is hot. Her face had gone somewhere I'd never once been invited. "We had roses like this," she said, not really to me, behind the house on Delancey Street. I started a whole flat of seeds the spring I was 19. Zinnias. Asters. I had a notebook. She paused. Then your grandma Ellen got sick. And it was 2 years, start to finish. And I was the one, "Denny, your uncle couldn't handle the hospital." So it was me. Every day, before work and after. Her fingers left the pedal. He got the truck when she passed. You know, everyone said he'd been through so much. My flat of seeds dried up on the windowsill. Nobody watered it. Everybody was too busy telling Denny how strong he was going to have to be. For the length of one breath, standing in the row my own hands had made. I saw her whole, a girl with a notebook, run through the same machine 30 years before me. My throat undid itself. I almost said, "Mom, I know that's the closest we ever came in my entire life." Then she felt me there, and her spine reassembled. And the visitor left her face like a light switching off in a farmhouse window. That's life. "Vren," she said briskly, already turning toward the tables. "The strong ones carry it. That's what love is." She walked back to the party. I stood in the row and let the bees have the silence. And then the spoon began to ring against the glass. My grandmother stood without help, which she wanted noted, and raised her lemonade to the field. 80 years. She said, and I've had my birthdays in kitchens, church halls, and one memorable year. A hospital waiting room. This is the first one I ever had in the middle of something honest. She turned to the buckets of garnet on the tables. I grew this peony the year my son was born. And every year after, last fall, I gave the roots to my granddaughter. Because a flower like this needs hands that show up in frost. And I know showing up hands when I see them. She looked straight at me, her chin trembling and her voice it never had a proper name, that flower. So today I'm naming it in front of witnesses, so it sticks. Callaway Garnet, grown by Wren Callaway on Wren Callaway's farm. This field is the most honest thing this family has grown in 30 years. The applause came warm and real, and 31 faces turned toward me. For once in my life, I stood in the light and did not check the exits. And that is the exact moment my mother rose from her chair, glass high, smile wide, and rode the applause like a woman catching a departing train. And one more piece of happy news. Everyone, while we're all together, her voice carried to the fence posts. You've all read about our Wren in the paper. Well, Callaway Blooms is becoming a true family business. Marissa, honey, stand up. Marissa's going to be running all the events and parties here at the farm. Both our girls together, we are just so proud of our girls. The clapping started up again. Uncertain. The way crowds clap when something feels off, but nobody wants to be the first to notice. Down the table, my aunt's eyes found mine and asked the question. Beside my mother, my sister was rising slowly to her feet, glass in hand, and the glass was already shaking. I didn't raise my voice. I've thought about that many times since, and I'm certain of it. A lifetime of practice holds even when your ears are ringing. I looked at my mother across the long table, 31 relatives between us, and said, that's not true. Mom, and it's not going to be simple. Like a frost report, the uncertain clapping died. My mother's smile held its position, but something behind it began working hard, and she opened her mouth to smooth it over. She never got there, because Marissa's glass hit the table, and my sister made a sound I'd never heard from her before, a laugh with the bottom torn out of it. Of course it's not true. She said, too loud, and then louder. Nothing about us is true. You want to clap for the girls. You want to hear about the girls. She swung toward the relatives like a lawn sprinkler. You think she built this alone. You know, they canceled her 18th birthday because I cried, canceled the party, kept the cake, changed the name on it. My name, I ate that cake. She was crying now. Mascara running. 22 years of curated fragility burning off like fog. And the money? Oh, you should know about the money. They took her savings, almost $10,000, her paychecks, and they poured it into me, into Columbus, and I flushed it in 11 days, like I flush everything. My mother was on her feet, saying her name in that emergency room voice, Marissa, sweetheart, you're not well. And Marissa wheeled on her, arm flung wide, and her hand caught the zinc bucket at the head table. It went over slow, the way disasters do. Water sheeted across the linen. 24 garnet stems spilled and rolled onto the September grass, red on green, in front of the entire family. In the ocean of that silence, my Aunt Denise stood up, white to the lips, looked at my mother, and said, you told us she left over a party. What I remember best about the next minute is the quiet. A whole field of people not moving. Peg by the coffee urn, arms crossed, watching my mother the way she'd watch a hawk over a hen house. Marissa sobbing into her hands. Done. emptied, smaller than I'd ever seen her. And my mother kneeling on the grass in her navy dress, gathering fallen peonies into her arms one by one. Because her hands needed a task while her empire did its arithmetic. Then she looked up at me and said it low, just for us, while the whole field held its breath behind me. Fix this. You can fix this. Vren, tell them the party was a misunderstanding. Tell them we helped you start this place. We're your parents. It's barely even a lie. Give your sister the events job. That's all. And this goes back together. And you come home, Sunday dinners, your room, your family. You can finally come home. Sweetheart, here's the part I need you to understand. I wanted it. 11 years later, I can say that plainly. Every cell in me that was ever 7 years old wanted it. Because it was the thing itself, the actual prize, held out in the open air at last. My mother asking me to come home. All I had to do was pay for it. Same currency as always, shrink the truth. Hand over the story, share the name on the sign, disappear at my own table one more time. I looked at her arms full of my grandmother's flowers. I heard the field behind me, finally seeing, you're right, Mom. I said, and my voice came out level as a floor. I've always been fine on my own. You made sure I got the practice. Her arms tightened around the stems. But I'm not buying my seat back. Not with the truth. Not with the farm. Not with me. You're welcome at my table as guests. Both of you. Any Sunday you want. That's the whole offer. It doesn't go on sale. My mother stood up slowly, still holding the peonies. For a second, then she laid them on the table like evidence, took Marissa by the hand, and walked out of my field without looking back. She never has. The party didn't end so much as exhale. My grandmother announced to no one in particular that it was the best birthday she'd had in 80 years. And she'd thank people not to argue, which somehow gave everyone permission to stay another hour. My aunt cut the cake with shaking hands and kept looking at me like a woman rereading a letter she'd filed wrong. My father stood at the gate a long time after my mother's car had gone. He'd ridden over with my uncle on purpose. I realized later, when I brought him his jacket, he turned his cap over in his hands like a wheel he was steering. I should have said something at your birthday. He said to the gravel, I've been saying nothing for 20 years. Vrain. Turns out it's the loudest thing I ever did. I told him I knew not times it's okay. I was done saying that one. Just times I know, Dad. He nodded, got in my uncle's truck, and went home to the house he'd chosen every day of my life. Because he was who he was. But that November, letters started coming. 1 a month. 4 lines at a time in handwriting like barbed wire. Saw peonies on a calendar at the feed store. Thought of you. Ground froze early this year. Dad. I kept every one. Here's where it all settled. In the plain math of afterward. The family did crack exactly the way the town still tells it. My aunt came to the farm the next weekend with lemon bars and an apology she'd written out longhand so she wouldn't botch it. Sunday dinners moved to my grandmother's kitchen, Opal. Denise. Josie half the time. Me smelling of eucalyptus and cooler water. Nobody at that table has ever once asked me to be smaller. My mother tried a new version for a while. Marissa was overtired. Ren is going through a phase, but a story needs listeners. And hers kept moving their subscriptions to the other side of the aisle in some cases. Literally, she still lives 2 miles up the road. We have not spoken since she walked out of the field. And I've made my peace with the strong possibility that we never will. Because peace was only ever on offer at a price I don't pay anymore. My father writes his 4 lines a month and slips a 20 in at Christmas like contraband, and loves me the way a man loves from inside a fence he built himself. I've stopped grading it. It's what he has. And Marissa, one night that winter, past midnight, my phone lit up with the first words my sister had sent me in over a year. The flowers were beautiful. That's all. No apology. No follow-up. I saw her across the pharmacy in March, and she looked at her shoes. I heard she moved in with a friend in Columbus, got a job at a garden center, of all places on this round earth. I never answered the text. I never deleted it either. Some seeds you just leave in the packet and see how you feel come spring. The farm went on being a farm, which is the quiet miracle of farms. Season 3 sold out its subscriptions by April. My grandmother's garnet went into the ground in May. 300 roots strong. Every single one descended from a shoebox. And in June, a girl named Tally started showing up. 14 years old. Bonge. All elbows and silence. The kind of kid who wins ribbons nobody drives out to see. Her mother needed her to be no trouble. And Tally was aiming to oblige. And I recognize the species on site. I pay her actual wages. I make her invoice me out loud, looking me in the eye, and the first time she managed it without apologizing. I gave her a raise on the spot. Last week, I caught her bossing a customer's kid away from the seedling trays. Hands on hips, taking up her whole entire patch of the doorway. And I had to go stand in the cooler for a minute. That's the crop I'm proudest of. If you're asking, not the flowers. The girl learning 3 years earlier than I did that she's allowed to send a bill for what she gives and that anybody who only loves her invisible isn't family. They're just a landlord with your childhood photos on the wall. If there's one thing I'd carve on a fence post and nail up where every fine on her own girl could read it, it's this love you have to earn by disappearing isn't love. It's rent. And the day you stop paying, you finally find out who was family and who is just collecting. That's my story. A canceled cake, a shoebox of peony roots, 2 acres, and 1 signature. If you've been the strong one at your family's table, I hope you plant something of your own this year and stand where it can be seen. Tell me in the comments what you would have said in that field. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Calm Drama Stories. Next week, another woman tells the whole truth, calmly, to the end.